My wife said cheating wasn't the end of the world. And you know what? She was right. It was just the beginning. Back then, I had no idea how a single message with a heart emoji would open the door to a nightmare I never saw coming. Claire was the smart one, an economics professor at the university here in Charlottesville, Virginia. I ran a local landscaping business. We didn't have kids, though not for lack of trying. It just hadn't happened, and by our mid-30s, we'd made our peace with it. We had our home, our friends, our routines. We had each other. Or so I thought. It started small, as these things do. Claire had been on maternity leave a year earlier, not for a baby of her own, but to care for her sister's newborn twins while her sister recovered from a complicated delivery. It had been a stressful time. And while Claire adored those kids, she came out of it different. Restless, maybe. She didn't return to teaching right away, opting to focus on freelance consulting work from home. At the time, I figured she just needed a break. So when her college friend, Amanda, asked Claire to tutor her 24-year-old son, Stephen, in economics, I thought it was a great idea. It'll get you out of the house, I'd said. You love teaching. And Amanda's kid could use your help, I'm sure. Claire had hesitated, but eventually agreed. And for the first couple of months, it seemed like it was exactly what she needed. She came home from their sessions with a spring in her step, smiling and chattier than usual. I remember thinking how good it was to see her excited about something again. But then came the first crack. I was working late one night, cleaning up after a landscaping job, when I checked my phone and saw a text from Claire. Stephen got an A on his econ midterm. I feel like a proud mom, LOL. Underneath it, a heart emoji. But the thing was, I hadn't sent a heart. It was a reply, Stevens. I stared at it for a second, feeling a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Suspicion? No, that seemed ridiculous. Maybe annoyance. Young people these days, I muttered. Hearts for everything. When I brought it up later, Claire laughed. Oh, that's just Stephen being Stephen, she said. You know how kids are. Kids? I teased. He's 24. Exactly, she said, grinning. Practically still a baby. I let it go, but the memory lingered in the back of my mind. A small stone at the bottom of a pond, sending ripples outward. And then there were the tutoring sessions themselves. They started as weekly meetings at a coffee shop near campus, then twice a week, then 3 times. He's struggling with macroeconomics, Claire explained when I asked. He just needs a little extra support. I shrugged it off. Claire was the kind of person who genuinely wanted to help people. It was one of the things I loved about her. But one night, I came home from work to find her in the kitchen, her phone lighting up with a text. I glanced at it out of habit and saw Stephen's name on the screen. I had fun today. Thanks for everything, Redheart. That same flicker came back, stronger this time. I didn't say anything right away. Maybe I should have. Instead, I filed it away in my mind, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. The days turned into weeks, and the pieces kept coming. Claire started dressing up more than usual for the tutoring sessions. Nothing too out of the ordinary, but enough that I noticed. She laughed harder at her texts, spent more time on her phone, and seemed distant, in a way I couldn't put my finger on. One night, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie when her phone buzzed. She picked it up and quickly silenced it, her cheeks flushing. Who's that? I asked, keeping my tone light. No one, she said too quickly. Amanda. Something about Stephen's coursework. Another piece. I didn't think much about Stephen before all this. I'd only met him once, at Amanda's 4th of July barbecue. He seemed nice enough, tall, quiet, a little shy. The kind of guy who probably got picked on in high school but grew into himself in college. But now, every mention of his name sent a strange twist through my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into nothing. But paranoia has a funny way of growing when you feed it even a little. And then came the night I checked her phone. I hadn't planned to do it. Claire had gone to bed early that night, leaving her phone on the coffee table. I sat there for a while, staring at it, telling myself it was wrong to snoop. Trust is the foundation of any marriage, right? But trust was starting to feel like quicksand beneath my feet. Before I could stop myself, I reached for the phone. It was unlocked. That felt like a small mercy. At least I wasn't crossing the line of trying to guess her passcode. I told myself I'd just take a quick look. One message, one thread, and I'd put it down. I tapped on Steven's name. The thread opened with dozens of messages, and immediately, I felt my stomach sink. It wasn't the quantity. People text a lot these days. It was the tone. Steven, I've been thinking about what you said. Claire, you're going to do great. You're so smart, Steven. You don't give yourself enough credit. Steven, only because I have you believing in me. Steven, I meant it, by the way. You're amazing. Red heart. Claire, stop it. You're going to make me blush. Blush? I scrolled up, trying to find the context. The messages blurred together as my pulse raced, my hands gripping the phone tightly. Most of it seemed innocent enough. Tutoring schedules, discussions about assignments, reminders about upcoming tests. But every so often, there was a little too much warmth, a compliment that felt just a shade too personal. Steven, you looked really nice today, by the way. Claire. Oh, stop, LOL. You're sweet. My jaw tightened. I put the phone down, leaning back on the couch and staring at the ceiling. Was I overreacting? These could just be the harmless exchanges of a young guy with a crush and a teacher humoring him. That's all it was, right? But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. The next day, I tried to act normal. Claire was cheerful at breakfast, humming to herself as she poured coffee. Big plans today? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She nodded. I've got a session with Steven at 2. Then I might swing by the library to grab some books. Do you need anything while you're out? I asked. Nope, I'm good. She kissed me on the cheek before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but at that moment, my curiosity had turned into an itch I couldn't ignore. I followed her. It wasn't hard. Claire wasn't exactly the kind of person to notice a car trailing her. She drove to the coffee shop near campus, the same place they always met, and parked her car. I pulled into a spot a few rows down, my heart pounding. I watched as she got out of the car and went inside. A few minutes later, Steven arrived. He was easy to spot, tall and gangly, with a shock of messy brown hair. They greeted each other at the counter, and Claire laughed at something he said. I felt a pang of something, jealousy, maybe, or just a deep, gnawing discomfort. For the next hour, I sat in my car, watching them through the window. From what I could see, it looked innocent enough. They sat across from each other, Claire gesturing at her notebook, Steven nodding and scribbling something down. Every so often, they'd laugh or lean in closer to share something on her laptop. Maybe that's all it was, I told myself. A teacher helping her student. But then, just as they were packing up to leave, Steven reached out and touched her arm. It was brief, but there was something about the way she smiled at him in return that made my stomach twist. I drove home feeling like an idiot. What was I doing, playing detective like this? I had no proof of anything beyond a few friendly texts and my own insecurities. Maybe Claire was right. Steven was just a kid, and I was blowing things out of proportion. But then the pieces started coming together in ways I couldn't ignore. Claire's tutoring sessions became more frequent, often running late into the evening. She started taking extra care with her appearance, nothing drastic, but enough that I noticed. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around the house, was now always in her pocket or face down on the table. And then there were the little lies. Hey, how was the library? I asked one night, trying to keep my voice light. Oh, I didn't make it, she said, barely looking up from her laptop. I just went straight home after tutoring, but I knew for a fact she'd stopped somewhere else. I'd driven by the library on my way home from work and hadn't seen her car in the lot. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every little inconsistency, every odd behavior chipped away at the foundation of our marriage until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The final straw came a week later. Claire had left her laptop open on the dining table while she ran upstairs to grab something. I walked by, glancing at the screen, and saw an email draft addressed to Steven. I don't know what to say to you anymore. This is complicated, and I don't want to hurt anyone, but I can't pretend this isn't real. Please understand. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Hey, Claire's voice broke the silence as she came back into the room. What are you doing? I turned to her, trying to keep my expression neutral. Nothing, I said, stepping away from the laptop. Just passing by. But inside, I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. Something was going on. I couldn't unsee the email. It was burned into my mind like a brand. Every word a confirmation of what I had been too afraid to admit. But still, I told myself I needed proof, something definitive. Until then, I couldn't confront her. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and second-guessing. I started noticing everything, every smile, every text, every time she left the house. It was like a switch had flipped, and suddenly I couldn't stop looking for signs. One Friday afternoon, Claire mentioned she had another tutoring session with Stephen. She seemed casual, almost too casual, and I felt that same flicker of unease. "Do you think you'll be home for dinner?" I asked as I cleared our coffee cups from the table. "Maybe," she said, grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up, though. He's got a big test coming up, so we might run late." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Good luck." As soon as she walked out the door, I made my move. I knew where they'd be meeting, the coffee shop near campus. And this time, I wasn't just going to sit in the parking lot. I waited about 15 minutes before heading out. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove, my thoughts racing. What was I even hoping to see? Did I really want to catch her in the act? The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, the sound of chatter and clinking mugs spilling out onto the sidewalk. I spotted them immediately, sitting at a corner table by the window. Claire was leaning forward, her expression animated as she spoke. Stephen was smiling, his eyes locked on hers. I ordered a coffee and took a seat a few tables away, pretending to scroll through my phone. My heart was pounding, and I felt like a fool. But then I noticed something strange. They weren't studying. There were no notebooks, no laptops, no textbooks. Just 2 cups of coffee and a shared look that made my stomach churn. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The way Claire reached across the table, her fingers brushing Stephen's, told me everything I needed to know. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my coffee untouched, my mind spinning. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. This was real. Eventually, they stood to leave, and I followed at a safe distance. They walked to Claire's car, laughing about something I couldn't hear. And then it happened. Stephen leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't long, and it wasn't overly passionate. But it was enough. Enough to shatter whatever shred of doubt I had left. I drove home in a daze, my chest tight, my hands trembling on the wheel. When Claire walked through the door later that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "You're up late." "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated, eyeing me cautiously. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to say it. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. "Yeah, just a long day." She gave me a small smile and kissed me on the cheek before heading upstairs. I stared at the whiskey in my hand, the image of her kissing Stephen playing on a loop in my mind. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Amanda's house. I hadn't seen her in a while, but she greeted me warmly, inviting me in for coffee. "What's going on?" she asked, setting a mug in front of me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "It's about Stephen," I said finally. Her brow furrowed. "What about him?" I took a deep breath. I think there's something going on between him and Claire." Amanda froze, her mug halfway to her lips. "What?" "I've seen things," I said, my voice cracking. "Messages, the way they act around each other. And yesterday, I saw them kiss." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might drop the mug. "Ian, are you sure? That doesn't sound like Claire. Or Stephen, for that matter." "I'm sure," I said, my hands shaking. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't ignore it anymore. Amanda set her mug down, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "I don't even know what to say. Stephen, he's always looked up to Claire. I thought she was just helping him with school." "So did I said bitterly. Amanda leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her hair. "I need to talk to him. No, I said quickly. Not yet. I need to hear it from Claire first. She nodded reluctantly. Okay, but, Ian, I'm so sorry. I left Amanda's house feeling no better than when I'd arrived. The only thing left to do now was confront Claire. That night, after dinner, I sat her down in the living room. Claire, I said, my voice trembling, we need to talk. She looked at me, her smile fading. What's wrong? I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. I know about Stephen. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she looked away, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ian, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I braced myself for what was coming next, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't deny it. That was the first thing that struck me. No excuses, no deflection, just silence. She looked at her hands like they held the answer to some impossible question. Ian, she said again, her voice cracking this time, I was going to tell you. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Tell me what? I asked, barely able to get the words out. She took a shaky breath, finally meeting my eyes. About Stephen. About what happened. What happened? I repeated, my voice rising. Claire, I saw you. I saw you kiss him. Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hands, as if she could push the truth back inside. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. What wasn't supposed to be like this? I demanded. You tutoring him? You spending every spare second with him? Or you, what? Falling for him? It's not like that, she said quickly. I didn't mean for this to happen. Then what did you mean to happen, Claire? My voice cracked under the weight of my anger. Because from where I'm sitting, it sure as hell looks like you meant for this. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't planned. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I snapped. You've done a bang-up job of that. For a moment, the only sound in the room was her quiet sobs. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was sit there, my head spinning. Ian, she said finally, her voice barely audible, you have to understand. It wasn't about you. It was about me. I stared at her, my anger giving way to something colder, heavier. What does that even mean? She wiped her eyes, struggling to find the words. For years, I've felt like I've been losing pieces of myself. I'm a wife. I'm a friend. I don't know, your partner in life. And that's wonderful, but somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was before all that. You're blaming this on an identity crisis? I asked incredulously. No, she said quickly. I'm not blaming anything. I'm just trying to explain. I shook my head, running a hand through my hair. Explain what? That this kid made you feel young again? That he stroked your ego and told you what you wanted to hear? Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, that's exactly what he did. He made me feel like I wasn't just a wife or a teacher or someone's rock. He made me feel like a woman, like I was beautiful and wanted. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. And I didn't do that for you? You did, she said quickly. You always did. But after so many years, it's different. You know that. You stopped noticing the little things about each other, and I let myself get caught up in something I shouldn't have. That's your excuse? I asked bitterly. 15 years, Claire. 15 years, and this is what it comes down to. It's not an excuse, she said, her voice shaking. I know I messed up, Ian. I know I broke your trust, and I don't know if I can ever fix it. But I'm not trying to justify what I did. I just want you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was my failure, not yours. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to say, what to think. Part of me wanted to lash out, to demand that she pack her things and leave. But another part of me, one I hated in that moment, wanted to hold on to her, to believe that we could somehow come back from this. What now? I asked finally, my voice hollow. What happens now, Claire? She hesitated, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know, she admitted. I don't have all the answers. But I know I love you, Ian. I always have. And if there's any way I can fix this, I'll do whatever it takes. Her words should have meant something. They should have given me hope. But all I could think about was that kiss. Did you sleep with him? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. She flinched, her face crumpling again. No, she said quietly. It never got that far. Why should I believe you? Because it's the truth, she said desperately. Ian, I swear to you. It never went beyond that kiss. I ended it before it could. Ended what? I demanded. Your tutoring sessions? Or your, whatever this was? Both, she said firmly. I told him I couldn't see him anymore. Not like that. Not at all. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the hurt and anger in my chest were too overwhelming. I need time, I said finally, standing up. I need space to figure out what I'm supposed to do with this. I understand, she said, her voice trembling. Take as much time as you need. I nodded, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house. Not with her, not right now. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of Charlottesville, the same question echoed in my mind. How had it come to this? The next few days passed in a haze. I crashed at a motel on the outskirts of town, my phone buzzing constantly with messages from Claire. Most of them were short, I love you. Please come home. A few were longer, more desperate attempts to explain or apologize. I read them all but didn't respond. I needed time to think, but mostly, I just felt numb. By the third day, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I called my best friend, Nate, who'd been my go-to guy since we were kids growing up in Richmond. Nate was the type of person who didn't sugarcoat things, and I needed someone to tell me if I was losing my mind. When I showed up at his place, he didn't say much at first, just handed me a beer and let me sit in his garage while he tinkered with his motorcycle. So, he said finally, wiping his hands on a rag, you gonna tell me why you look like you haven't slept in 3 days? I took a long swig of the beer, the words sticking in my throat. Claire cheated on me. Nate froze, his expression unreadable. With who? Stephen, I said bitterly. Her tutoring student. Amanda's kid. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Damn, didn't see that coming. Neither did I said, my voice cracking. Nate pulled up a chair, sitting across from me. What are you gonna do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to kick her out and never look back. But another part of me, I trailed off, struggling to find the words. You still love her, Nate finished for me. I nodded, staring at the ground. Yeah, but I don't know if I can forgive her. Nate leaned back, crossing his arms. Look, man, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but 15 years is a long time. You don't just throw that away because of one mistake. Mistake? I snapped. She kissed him, Nate. She let him get close enough to think he had a shot. That's not just a mistake. That's a choice. You're right, he said calmly. But you gotta ask yourself, is this the end? Or is it just a crack you can patch up? I hated that he was being so rational. It was easier to be angry, to let that anger justify walking away. But deep down, I knew he had a point. Do you think I'm an idiot for even considering giving her another chance? I asked quietly. Nate shook his head. No, I think you're a guy who loves his wife and doesn't want to make a decision he'll regret later. And there's nothing wrong with that. His words stayed with me as I drove back to the motel. I spent the night tossing and turning, replaying every moment of the last 15 years in my mind. The good times, the bad, the life we'd built together. By morning, I still didn't have a clear answer, but I knew I couldn't keep running. I went home later that day, the house quiet and still when I walked in. Claire was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, her eyes wide with relief. Ian, she said softly. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. I'm not ready to talk yet. She nodded, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. I understand. I walked past her and went upstairs, the familiar scent of our home hitting me like a wave. It felt surreal to be back, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. That night, we slept in the same bed but on opposite sides, the silence between us heavier than ever. The next few weeks were a slow, painful dance of avoidance and half-hearted conversations. Claire tried to give me space, but I could see the strain in her every movement. She walked on eggshells around me, afraid to say the wrong thing. I spent my days throwing myself into work, taking on extra jobs to avoid being at home. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the constant hum of doubt and anger in my chest. One evening, Amanda called. "Ian," she said hesitantly, "can we talk?" "What is it?" I asked, my voice tired. "It's about Steven," she said. "He told me everything." My grip on the phone tightened. "Everything?" "Yes," she said. "He admitted to having feelings for Claire, but he also told me she ended it before anything serious happened. He's a mess right now, and I'm not saying this to defend him, but he's beating himself up about it." "Good," I said flatly. Amanda sighed. "Ian, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to hear it from me." Claire didn't lead him on, not intentionally. Steven's young and confused, and he mistook her kindness for something else. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't make me feel any better. If anything, they made things worse. "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally, ending the call. I sat in the dark for a long time, replaying Amanda's words in my mind. That night, Claire approached me in the living room. "Ian," she said softly, "I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. But I need to know, do you see a future for us? Or have I ruined everything?" I looked at her, her eyes pleading with me to say something, anything. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest glimmer of clarity. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded. "That's all I can ask." It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. Trying wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Saying I was willing to work on things and actually doing it were two different animals. Claire and I started therapy together a week later. It was her suggestion, and while part of me wanted to scoff at the idea, I agreed. At that point, I needed some kind of direction, someone to tell me how to make sense of the mess we were in. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Myers, was calm and professional, the kind of person who spoke in measured tones and never reacted too much to anything. She started the first session by asking both of us to share what brought us there. Claire went first. She talked about her feelings of restlessness, her struggles with identity, and how she let those emotions lead her to a place she never should have gone. She cried through most of it, her voice trembling as she apologized again and again. When it was my turn, I found myself fumbling for the right words. "I feel betrayed," I said finally, "and confused. I keep thinking about all the years we've been together, and I can't figure out how we got here, how I missed it." Dr. Myers nodded, her pen moving across her notepad. "Ian, it's important to remember that infidelity often stems from underlying issues that aren't always obvious. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it might help to explore what those issues were." I bit back the urge to snap. It wasn't an issue that kissed Steven in the parking lot. It was Claire. But I kept my mouth shut and let the session play out. Over the next few weeks, therapy became a regular part of our routine. Some sessions were productive, others felt like pulling teeth. But slowly, pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Claire and I sat in the car outside the therapist's office. Neither of us spoke for a while, the silence heavy between us. "Do you think we're making progress?" she asked finally, her voice tentative. I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some days, it feels like we're just going in circles. But I guess the fact that we're still trying means something." She nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I hate what I've done to us, Ian. I hate that I made you question everything. But I still believe in us. I have to." I didn't respond, but her words stayed with me. About a month into therapy, something shifted. It was a Saturday morning, and I was working in the backyard, trimming the hedges along the fence. Claire came outside with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one on the small table next to me. "Thanks," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. She didn't say anything, just sat down and watched me work. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel strained or awkward. It felt normal. "You always did have a way with plants," she said after a while. a small smile tugging at her lips. I glanced at her, surprised by the softness in her voice. "It's just hedges." "No," she said. "It's more than that. You take care of things. You always have." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. For so long, I'd been so focused on what was broken between us that I'd forgotten the parts that still worked. "Do you want to help?" I asked, holding out the clippers. Her smile widened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimpse of the Claire I fell in love with. "Sure," she said, taking the clippers from my hand. It wasn't a magical fix. One good day didn't erase the pain or rebuild the trust. But it was a step. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together, cooking meals, taking walks, talking about things that had nothing to do with therapy or Steven. It was slow and awkward at first, like learning how to dance with a partner you didn't know anymore. But little by little, we started to find our rhythm again. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire turned to me, her expression serious. "Ian, there's something I need to tell you." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "It's about Steven," she said quietly. "I haven't talked to him since I ended things, but Amanda told me he's thinking about transferring schools. I think he feels guilty about everything." I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me didn't care what Steven felt. He wasn't my responsibility. But another part of me, the part that used to care about people even when it wasn't easy, felt a pang of sympathy. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Claire asked hesitantly. I shrugged. "I don't know. That's not really our concern anymore, is it?" She nodded, her gaze dropping to her lap. "You're right. I hope he finds his way." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about how far we'd come since that first gut-wrenching conversation. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a chance we could be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The months that followed weren't easy. Trust is like a fragile vase. Once shattered, even the most careful repair leaves visible cracks. Every laugh, every smile between us was shadowed by doubt. Was she really here with me, or was a part of her still somewhere else? But there were also glimmers of hope, small moments where the weight of everything seemed to lift, even for a second. A shared joke while cooking dinner, her hand brushing mine as we walked through the farmer's market, the way she started humming again when she thought no one was listening. We were rebuilding, brick by uneven brick. One evening, Claire came into the living room holding a photo album. It was one of those old ones, with the plastic sleeves and sticky backing. "Found this in the closet," she said, sitting down next to me on the couch. I raised an eyebrow. "We still have photo albums?" She laughed softly. "Apparently." She opened it, and we started flipping through the pages together. Pictures of our wedding, our first apartment, vacations we'd taken over the years. There was one of us at a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, bundled up in coats and scarves, our noses red from the cold. "That was the weekend we got lost on the trail," she said, her smile tinged with nostalgia. "Because you insisted the map was upside down," I teased. "It was upside down," she shot back, laughing. We turned the pages slowly, the memories washing over us like a gentle tide. For the first time in months, it felt like we weren't carrying the weight of what had happened. We were just Ian and Claire, the couple who once built a life together from scratch. When we reached the last page, Claire closed the album and looked at me, her expression serious. "I don't want to lose this," she said quietly. "I don't want to lose us." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. For so long, I'd been so focused on my pain, my anger, that I hadn't really thought about what she was feeling. "I don't want to lose us either," I admitted, my voice rough. Her eyes filled with tears, and she leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run. It was something I used to do all the time, but had let fall by the wayside in the chaos of the last few months. As I ran through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, the crisp morning air filling my lungs, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Claire and I had been through hell. There were days when I wasn't sure we'd make it, but we were still here, still trying. And maybe that was enough. When I got back to the house, Claire was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. She looked up when I walked in, a faint smile on her lips. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." I replied, grabbing a glass of water. She nodded, not pressing further. That was one of the things I appreciated about her. She knew when to give me space. As I sat down at the table, she placed a plate of pancakes in front of me. Thanks, I said, digging in. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. For a while, we ate in comfortable silence. I've been thinking, she said finally, breaking the quiet. About what? About us, she said, her voice steady. About what comes next. I set my fork down, meeting her gaze. And what do you think comes next? I think we keep doing what we're doing, she said. Therapy, rebuilding, figuring out how to trust each other again. But I also think maybe we need something to look forward to. Something to remind us why we're doing this. Like what? I asked, curious. She hesitated, then smiled. What if we took a trip? Just the two of us. Somewhere new. Somewhere we can start fresh. I considered her suggestion, the idea settling in my mind. Where did you have in mind? I don't know, she admitted. I just think it could be good for us. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. A week later, we booked a cabin in the Shenandoah Valley. It wasn't far, just a couple of hours from Charlottesville, but it felt like the right place to start. When we arrived, the air was crisp and clean, the forest stretching out around us like a protective cocoon. The cabin was small but cozy, with a stone fireplace and a porch overlooking the woods. This is nice, Claire said as we unpacked, her voice tinged with awe. Yeah, I agreed, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. We spent the next few days hiking, cooking together, and sitting by the fire, talking late into the night. It wasn't perfect. We still had our moments of tension, our awkward silences, but it was a step in the right direction. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Claire reached for my hand. Ian, she said softly. Yeah, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm so sorry. For everything. I looked at her, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the moonlight. I know, I said, and I believe you. Her eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed my hand tightly. For the first time in months, I felt like we were going to be okay. When we got back home from the trip, things felt lighter between us. The cabin hadn't magically fixed everything, but it reminded us of something we hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The routine of life returned, but it didn't feel as heavy. Claire started teaching again, finally taking on a couple of university courses. I threw myself back into work, but I made an effort to come home earlier than I used to. Little by little, we found ways to reconnect. There were still moments when doubt crept in, like a shadow that refused to leave entirely. If Claire's phone buzzed, I felt my stomach tighten. If she seemed distracted, my mind wandered to the worst. But she noticed these things, and instead of brushing them aside, she addressed them. Do you want to see who it is? She asked one night when her phone chimed on the coffee table. No, I said, though I appreciated the gesture. You can if it'll make you feel better, she offered. I shook my head, forcing a smile. It's okay. I trust you. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I meant it. One evening, as we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, Claire turned to me with a small smile. You know what I realized on the trip? What's that? I asked, leaning back in my chair. That we were so busy living our lives, we forgot to live them together. I thought about her words, nodding slowly. Yeah, I think we both got comfortable, and then we stopped noticing what we were losing. She reached over, taking my hand in hers. I don't want that to happen again, Ian. I don't want us to forget what we have. Me neither, I said, squeezing her hand gently. Over the next few months, we made a conscious effort to prioritize our relationship. Friday nights became date nights, sometimes simple dinners at home, sometimes something more adventurous like trying a new restaurant or catching a live music show downtown. We started rediscovering each other, peeling back the layers that had grown thick with time. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing the betrayal as the defining moment of our marriage. It was part of our story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. One day, as we were walking through a park near our house, Claire turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about the future? She asked. All the time, I replied. Why? She hesitated, then smiled. I was thinking, maybe it's time we start thinking about it in a new way. I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. I know we said we made peace with not having kids, she continued, her voice soft. But what if we revisited that idea? Maybe adoption or fostering. I don't know. I just feel like there's something more for us out there. Her words caught me off guard, but they also filled me with an unexpected warmth. The idea of starting something new, something bigger than us, felt right. It's a big decision, I said carefully. I know, she said quickly, and I don't want to push you. I just wanted to put it out there. I nodded, smiling at her. Let's think about it. Together. Her face lit up, and in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the life we could have. A life not defined by what we'd been through, but by what we could build moving forward. As the weeks turned into months, Claire and I found ourselves on solid ground again. The cracks were still there, of course, but they no longer felt like fault lines waiting to break. They were part of us now, reminders of how far we'd come. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Claire rested her head on my shoulder. I love you, she said softly. I love you too, I replied, wrapping my arm around her. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. We weren't perfect, and we never would be. But we were enough.